Okay, we're good to go. Welcome back to the third panel discussions of today. I'm happy to have 4 panelists with me here on stage. We'll talk about unlocking sustainable investments, harnessing AI for ESG data sourcing and reporting. I'm glad that we put together a panel of 4 different perspectives. Andreas Ginschel, he's managing director of an asset management firm, Effectual Capital, so he brings in the investor view and how to use and consume data. Then it's Rebecca Palmer, she's from ICE Data Services, a big vendor, and she brings in the commercial perspective, how to evaluate business models with ESG. Then it's Professor Thorsten Sellhorn. He's the chairholder of the Institute of Accounting and Auditing of the Ludwig-Maximilians University in Munich. He brings the ideas, let's say, what's new. And then next to me is Julius Manet. He's founder and director of Business Network Services, BNS. And he has done a tremendous, or very exciting job extracting register data with AI. So he knows pretty much everything, what happens in Germany, Registerdaten, Handelsregister. So he knows the stake of each stakeholder in a privately held company. It's really nice, and he has a lot of expertise in extracting the data. So we want to have a Slido deck. Can someone, or Andy, you will help me with this, So using this QR code, you can type in questions, and then someone will rate it up or down, and so we can prioritize. And we have prepared some questions, and if there's something coming in from the audience, we'll be happy to take these questions as well. Let's start right away with data collections. Rebecca, maybe you can start and tell us what ICE is offering with ESG, and what's your state of the art right now at ICE on ESG?
State of the art, yes. So ICE is, let's say, cautiously approaching the AI phenomenon. And we have recently established a centre of excellence for AI, because I know that that part of the reason for the caution of approaching this is largely around making sure that we have all the necessary guardrails in place around data governance and the sort of various rules around data protection that are needed to be maintained, given we're an organisation with so many different types of data sources in place, as well as customer data. So from that perspective, we're being ultra careful. But a couple of years back, we did make an acquisition of a US firm, actually, that specialises in mortgage information. And with that organisation came some level of AI technology that we're now looking to leverage much further and explore kind of what different capabilities there could be to start collecting data in a much more speedy way, let's say. The initial use case was around actually the collection of sort of mortgage application-related data, which this sort of was able to really help us in that space. But what we're now really looking at how we can kind of leverage the technology more into is around the collection of financial data, both security level data as well as ESG company data. Whilst we've not adopted this wholesale, I must point out, back to my point about caution, we're doing various pilots now around how we can utilize the data, the systems, to read the vast number of documents that there are. Just to kind of maybe give you a sort of an idea of scale. We have about 13,000 companies in our ESG company data universe. And for each of those companies, we're looking to find within the documents somewhere between maybe 600 or 700 data points for each company we're looking for. And obviously, they may or may not be there. But on top of that, we're also trying to capture the metadata around that information. So, for example, we like to offer customers the ability to, in our viewer, right-click on a data point and look through to what was the source of that information, what page was that on. Right now, we have 130 analysts collecting this data manually.
Wow.
And it takes an analyst around about 8 hours to build a complete profile, complete with all the metadata of a company. So multiply that by 13,000 and you get the picture. And so for us, clearly, this is a very exciting proposition that we could try and leverage some of this technology to accelerate some of that process. But, you know, we've been trying out different technologies to look at how we can accelerate that, gradually feeding the models sort of a bit more information and sort of looking at that sort of confidence score to see what we're getting back. And then our analysts stepping in to sort of teach the model where it went wrong to try and improve the confidence score for the next run of documents. So we're still very much in the model learning phase, but you know that we see the scope as being huge.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is massive, a massive amount of data, but the tsunami is yet to come.
Yes, CSRD.
And I know that Thorsten has done a lot of research on this. Thorsten, what's the tsunami like? Could you tell us more on what's on the plate? Yeah.
I'll try. The tsunamis, as tsunamis are, terrifying and fascinating at the same time. Right? So companies are terrified about all the ESG data points that they're going to have to provide, starting this year, actually, for the biggest ones and the publicly traded ones. We're talking variously about between 500 and 1,100 data points per firm. Wow. That, of course, depends on which ESG topics are deemed material by the company, either from a financial perspective or from an impact perspective. So companies will have to select which items, which ESG topics they consider material for themselves. And then they're going to have to report these data points under European sustainability reporting standards. Lots of companies are struggling with this. They're trying to put in place the systems, the processes to collect and generate this data and report it. These systems and processes will, at some point in the future, look like the ones that now underlie financial reporting. But most companies are not there yet. So that's the terrifying bit. Of course, for us as the users of this data, this is a very fascinating prospect to have all this data available. One thing I'm worried about is that companies will use this materiality assessment that precedes the reporting to filter out lots of ESG topics that they would rather not talk about. So trying to build a tool, and that's what I'm representing here. I'm representing what's called the Sustainability Reporting Navigator. It's a think tank out of the universities of Cologne, Frankfurt, and Munich. We're trying to build a platform that assesses companies' ESG reporting, including assessing the extent to which companies actually do disclose the topics that should be material for them, at least from the perspective of stakeholders, and if companies actually are in line with those expectations that stakeholders have when it comes to their ESG topics that they should be reporting. So that's something we're focusing on. Other than that, if I may say that, when Rebecca was talking about what she's doing, my heart kind of sank because our Sustainability Reporting Navigator has a very similar idea, but vastly fewer resources and smaller scope. But I think we should talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this seems to be a mission impossible if there's no AI. And this brings me to you, Julius. Maybe you need a type of Julius to solve this. Can you tell us how you extracted this Bundesanzeigerhandelsregister with your AI tools?
Yes. So my company, I am actually not a founder. It was started by Norman Rentrop's family office in 2016, and we tried to get all the available public information for basically every German business, because when we looked at, okay, what types of investments did we make in the past which were wrong, it was more a misjudgment of management, not about the financials. And there was no good solutions for us, so we built it ourselves, and I'm responsible for that. And we basically get all the publications from all the German registries, and over the past years developed a model to extract the business relationships and financial data. And in the past, it was very difficult because we had to train, and it's very time-consuming to annotate all this data and get the information. And then, even then, the accuracy was very low. So human extractions a few years ago was still much better than AI extraction. But now with the large language models, actually, AI is getting better than human extraction, and it's much faster, more efficient. So I'm hopeful that all this ESG data will also be able to extract it automatically. So no 130 analysts need to look at this data, because I, in the past, also had to do this when I was an intern. So I know it's painful.
Yeah, and just about the sheer amount of documents, it's 4 million per month. Yeah.
Yes. So I think it's even more. So in Germany, we have 2 million companies, and depending how you calculate, every time a new CEO is selected or new procurer, change of business address, public companies report much more. There's a new report, a change of membership of the board. So it's millions and millions. So it would be impossible to extract with humans, or at least we couldn't afford it.
Thank you. Andreas, you as the consumer of all this data, what would be your preferred choice if you could say, well, this is my wish list, or what's your goal in analyzing ESG data?
Well, we're at the receiving end of all this flood and flood of data and tsunami. And for us, the first issue is to make sense of all the data that we get. So we have a tremendous amount of data that we get, but the first thing we need to do is to make sense of it. That actually requires a bit of human intelligence to figure out what is it actually that we want to achieve with it. And for sustainable investing, that turns out to be quite a challenge. If you go to any sustainable investing event or sustainable finance event, you'll quickly figure out that they can't even agree on what it really means. And even the regulator can't even agree on what it is. So the first step is to find out, what do we actually mean by it? What is sort of an objective way of doing that? And that's something that we have provided. We've also been founded by a large private asset owner to actually solve that problem for them. What is an objective way of defining sustainability? And obviously, for decision criterion, objectiveness is something extremely important. If beauty is just in the eye of the beholder, it doesn't get you anywhere. The second, then, once you've defined what is your objective view on what sustainability means, you quickly come to the conclusion, well, it needs to be data-driven. And this is when we get back to the data. So we try to collect as much as objective, meaning physical data that we can get, what these companies are doing, what they're emitting, what resources they're using, and so forth, and then evaluate that. The question or the requirement for AI comes in when it comes to data quality. So AI, I think, can help tremendously improving the data quality, can make it also cheaper, can make it more consistent, so improve the quality. And the other thing that it can deliver is it can provide, and you just gave a good example of that, Julius, it can provide a much higher level of granularity. So whereas using commercial databases today, we may get only, say, the carbon emissions of a certain large global corporation for their entire corporate. We don't know where that is coming from. Is that emitted in the US? Is that emitted in Canada? Is that emitted in Europe, where you have different taxation schemes and so forth? So granularity is something that is very important for us, and I think AI will be a great tool to enhance that.
Thank you. Coming back to quality, I know that you mentioned the due diligence that you had with the data consumer. And there's a big firm, I don't want to say the name, but it's an 8 billion company focusing on manually extracting registered data. Can you say something about this? And what was like, how much better was it? Or
yeah, so when we started in 2016 and even until now, like Dun & Bradstreet all has all those ownership information, but it's very bad. So it's often the ownership isn't not proper. So that was one of the reasons. So our family office didn't want to start a data company, but basically we had to because the other solutions weren't good enough. And yes,
Yeah.
And I have one point for granularity. I think it's interesting that there's a company called Trust, and they have a subsidiary called Boskalis. So they build huge ships which deliver oil rigs, and they're also used to deliver wind energy turbines. Yeah, and they also cleared up the Suez Canal when it was filled up a few months or years ago. And in the current ESG reporting, it's not granular enough because Trust is considered environmentally bad, but actually it's delivering all those wind turbines, but they get put in the wrong category because those ships can be used to deliver oil rigs. So I think granularity is very important.
Yeah, and I think values change over time. I mean, 5 years ago, military was bad, and now it's defense, so it's good. So the way you look on data is different. Thorsten, can you tell us something about the open science approach that you have? So it's the public good that you are building, and so this differentiates you from the other.
Yeah, we're basically a bunch of professors and doctoral students who are interested in ESG. We started by getting interested in the alphabet soup of different standards out there. ESRS came along, the CSRD, the ISSB under the IFRS Foundation, GRI has been around for a long time, all these different standards and frameworks, and we started out by figuring out, okay, what are the exact disclosure requirements down to the atomistic data point that all these different frameworks require? What are the cross-sections among the frameworks? What are the common data points that all these frameworks require? And what are differences? And that's something that we put into a database and analyzed and gave companies ideas about, I currently do GRI, what do I have to add if I'm going to now have to meet the requirements of the CSRD, for example. And then we said, okay, now that we have understanding about the data points, let's now look at how well companies are already complying with all these different standards. So we analyzed companies' practices using also a manually driven approach. So we basically had students and doctoral students working in teams to collect data from reports. We also tag these reports to the pages from which the data comes. So basically pretty much what you're doing with a smaller scope though. And then we made this data available on the internet for free. So that's the public good idea. So we're not currently a commercial venture. We're basically investing university money and some private donors to generate this information. If anybody's interested in this, we have a booth here in the hallway. And yeah, that's something we, I think, want to keep doing, making this data, which is public data to begin with, available to those who are interested in it and who would like to know more about that. And what we're also very much interested in, not just providing the raw data online, but also adding analyses. So this notion of materiality again. So we're not clear at all in terms of what are the data points among the 1,000 out there that people actually care about. So what do investors need to see? What are NGOs interested in? What about lenders? What about employees, suppliers? What are all these parties interested in? So we're trying to run academic studies to actually find out what are the data points, what are the topics that these stakeholders prefer. So we have 3 areas, so the requirements, the practices and the preferences of stakeholders that we're analyzing as a public good and open science platform at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, can I just remind you of the QR code and the Slido deck, because obviously we have no questions so far. Annie, maybe you can, there it is. So please provide us with some questions. And One question that I have is, as an investor, when I look at ESG data, I often find data that are not, or that have some controversies. And for instance, Volkswagen, by the way, I have a Volkswagen car. I don't want to blame this company, but they have an A-, and I think, hey, they obviously had this diesel scandal. They have some governance issues. How could that be? And asking you, Andreas, as an investor, how do you double check this data, or is this plausible for you?
Well, what we do is basically use a host of different data sources. So we don't rely on one particular database. We use multiple databases. We cross-check those. We try to also cross-check against other companies in the same industry. So just make consistency checks to ensure data quality. Of course, it's very hard in general to detect something like fraud, whether it's in financial data or ESG data. By sort of making those consistency and cross checks across different firms, you can get a feel for that, and sort of it can point you towards possibly digging deeper there. But in general, that is a challenge. We try to deal with that problem by, in our investment sort of strategy, we tend to diversify to a large extent. So even if we get into, even if the data quality for one of those investments may be inferior, diversification is not just an answer for investment risk, but is also a risk for sort of data quality risk, if you want to call it that way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rebecca, do you have something to double check or to avoid biases in data? I think, that's my personal impression, I think that big companies have better scores. Maybe I'm wrong.
So we don't actually score companies ourselves. Mm-hmm. We own the New York Stock Exchange. It would probably be a perceived conflict of interest, I would say, if we started scoring companies, particularly those that listed on our exchange. So we've avoided that one. What we do, though, is we collect the data in as much granularity as we can, with the view to providing it to the likes of investors and so on that want to come up with their own approach for this. And so what we're really focused on is that data quality aspect, and making sure that we've looked at the source. We've kind of got systematic checks that sort of look at, company X reported Scope 1 emissions of, this last year, but somehow this year it's jumped by tenfold. Mm-hmm. Is actually they're just a decimal place in the wrong point or something like that. Those kinds of checks to make sure that they're sense checked, that there's, we're looking at movements now. Okay, could we do that very well with AI? Probably, actually. That's probably a ripe scenario for us to start running models over the data that we've got to look at outliers.
What would you do if Heidelberg Cement renames them to Heidelberg Materials? What would be the result? Downgrade? Or, obviously they want to have a better name, yeah. Mm-hmm. Because we would just collect that as a corporate action, but so we wouldn't reflect any difference in the perception of the collection. As long as the record that was called Heidelberg Cement was then Heidelberg Materials, was the same thing, and there was a link through our business entity data to what the record was, so you could continue to track, was their emissions reporting affected in any way by their name change, or did it just continue on its little trajectory as was? So that would be our key focus, of making sure that there was continuity of reporting that the user could track back to. But for us, the data quality piece is really, I think, the key piece for us around the use of AI, and why we sort of, I guess, cautiously entered into that space. And, some very interesting points there about, can we actually be more accurate with AI? So far, we've not managed to get to the level of data precision that we're really looking for, that have allowed us to give over more of our data collection processes to automation. So far it's very much been that
we'll try out some automation and then a human will step in. And to be honest, I can't see a point where we won't do that. I think that realistically, there's always going to be the need for a human to step into that collection process. We haven't talked about hallucinations or anything like that. Okay, probably more difficult to hallucinate around a report, but I think it's quite important that you've got a human sense checking what's being collected. Interesting question there, because I do see the taxonomy as being absolutely ripe for AI collection, because the regulator has been very prescriptive about the format in which that data is disclosed. That to me is an obvious choice for trying to test out your AI. CSRD, and you may disagree with me here, but because although the data points have been described, there is no prescriptive format. Everybody's pretty going to be relieved about that. But, from an AI perspective, it's not like we've said to issuers, right, you need to perform all of this reporting in exactly this order, in this sequence, in those tables, etc. So there is still quite a bit for the AI to learn. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think with the taxonomy, it's tabular. I think this is the key to where the success is going to lie a lot with. I listened to a panel earlier on today where they were talking about this, is with these sort of repetitive sort of tools or data disclosures where you can really quite quickly teach the model to find the data, and it's otherwise for a human fairly repetitive and dull to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's dull. Yeah, and no one wants to do these kind of jobs. And I mean, the topic of this discussion is harnessing AI for data sourcing and reporting, and we have been talking or thinking about ways to ease reporting duties for small and mid-sized companies. Julius, given your data, you can autofill most of these templates. Can you elaborate on that?
So if you look at the German companies, the current annual reports, and you look at businesses from the same industry, a lot of it is the same. So, and for smaller companies, it's very difficult to fill out all those annual reports for each subsidiary and so on. And Alexis and I, we currently think about creating an autofill service, because we got some requests from German companies, and so they can basically pre-fill a lot of the sentences for their business, because a lot of it is just repetitive. Especially if you look at a single company, obviously the next report will be quite similar. But if you have to do this the first time, I'm pretty sure you can get at least a start by looking at companies which are similar to your company, and then let the AI write a first draft.
Super. I often attend meetings with family business owners, and for them, most companies have a second financial division just for the reporting on ESG. So this drives them crazy. Yeah? And if you're a Siemens company, you might have a dedicated team. But if you're a small and mid-sized company, it's the manager himself or herself, and that's really nice. Curious to say.
If I may add another use case here. Mm-hmm. So one of my colleagues, who's also one of the founders of the Sustainability Reporting Navigator, Max Müller in Cologne, he's working with a startup that uses AI to pre-fill questionnaires. So lots of companies, including many that you of course know, receive questionnaires from data collectors, data providers, where they're asked to please fill in 120 ESG data points, right? The Carbon Disclosure Project, for example, is one of those huge questionnaires that take companies days and days to fill out. And this startup basically automates the process. It maintains for each company a data set. And this automatically pre-fills these questionnaires, and then the company will only have to go through and correct here and there or add something. And that is, I think, the kind of scale benefits that AI can bring, where data is highly standardized, but like Rebecca said before, where data is not standardized, where it's narrative, where it has tables and figures and comes as PDF documents. That's where I is still struggling, I think, and I would love to see where this is going. I'm personally currently still struggling with getting AI tools to function in a way that we can really rely on for accuracy as well and scale.
Super. Yeah, thank you. We did take the first question, or
Social.
The first question: companies need to report and comply with EU taxonomy as well as CSRD. Rebecca, is there an overlap?
There's not much of an overlap, really. So the taxonomy really requires 3 data points. Companies will have to talk about their sales that relate to green activities under the taxonomy definition, their operating expenditures, and their capital expenditures. So companies will have to provide a big table where they list their business activities, their segments, and for each of them, these 3 KPIs. This is basically part of the CSRD reporting requirements, but the CSRD goes way beyond that. So there's not really overlap, I wouldn't say.
Okay, thank you. So we can skip that one. Next comes from Axel. To what extent have the recent ISS, IFRS standards have been implemented to reduce reporting complexity and avoid double materiality?
It doesn't consider double materiality. That was the big discussion around ISSB, where CSRD does. It doesn't so much, although they've woven in a quasi consideration. But yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know if it's been implemented to reduce complexity, but it's been implemented to try and bring about standardization, which should reduce complexity of consumption of the data. So the idea is that this is a global baseline for reporting that should, in theory, also gel with CSRD. I'd love to know more about your work on to what extent it gels. But it should be a global baseline that builds actually on TCFD reporting. And then CSRD goes beyond that. But it'd be interesting as well to layer on top things like TNFD, which is now another layer of reporting around biodiversity that I think we're going to see a big gravitation towards.
Okay, I hope this is a good answer to Axel's questions. It's very much detail, so I cannot, I do not get it completely. But all these. There's a second question coming. IFRS S1 and S2 asked to disclose any material, climate, and sustainable issue that might impact the future valuation of the company, linking the financial and non-financials. Now, this is very detailed.
I'd love to take this because that's really at the heart and core of what much of my research is currently on. So there's this notion of financial information and sustainability information to grow together, to connect, to integrate, right? To have these 2 parts of the corporate reporting landscape to really talk to each other and get connected. So these IFRS S1 and S2, those are the ISSB standards. They don't require financial information per se, but generally the idea is that financial and non-financial information will be connected, that the IFRS accounting standards and the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards will be consistent with each other, and that the resulting reports, the corporate reports that have these 2 elements, the sustainability report and the financial report, that they are based on the same underlying assumptions, that they cross-reference each other. For example, if a company in their sustainability report under S2, the climate disclosure standard, talks about its transition plans, its net zero targets and the like, that in the financial report we see corresponding information about how these transition plans and these climate targets affect the company's existing assets and liabilities and how they link to the company's future cash flows. So making the cross-reference between sustainability and the financial information. I think that's really where all of these things kind of crystallize. In the sustainability space, I perceive a lot of, let me call it off the record, cheap talk going on. And in the financial statements, right, where we really have audit going on and where we have regulation, that's really where the information has a much harder quality. And that's where we should really see the really important and the really decision-useful information to be found. Unfortunately, that's my last point, in the current project that we have, we don't really find very much disclosure about climate risks in the financial statements. There's lots of disclosures about climate risk outside of the financial statements, but in the financial statements themselves, companies barely talk about it. That's only recently changing a bit. Not in the US, but here in Europe.
I think typically it's a different report. You know, the companies are doing a CSR report, or now, I guess we'll see CSRD being reported in its own document.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very impressed by all these specific taxonomy type of details. Yeah, and I know that there's many investors not understanding what actually the numbers are talking or mean, and there's this implicit temperature rise number.
Implied temperature rise, yeah.
So, and I found this very helpful, because everyone talks about this 1.5 degree goal, and you can, evaluate numbers and compare investments to this goal. And do you do this at ICE, or?
We do, yes. So actually, this is, and to go back to the point we were just talking about on the companies' decarbonisation plans, this is absolutely critical to both the implied temperature rise and in fact, I think the financials. So there's lots of debate. I'll come back to your question very quickly. Let me just circumnavigate here. So there's lots of debate around what makes a good, robust decarbonisation plan. And this is really important because to the other point that was made, there can be a lot of hot air around this. Yeah, we're going to decarbonise by 2050, absolutely. And the board that's in place at this point in time may or may not be there in 2050. Yeah. And so to the extent to which it matters to them is, they can sort of kick the can down the road a bit. But actually now increasingly people are really looking at these decarbonisation plans to sort of look for credibility. And one of the really important things to tie it back to the financial piece is, have they actually put the money aside to do this? Because if they haven't, how are you going to do it? It doesn't come for free. So to then go back to your point around the the other reporting pieces. Where was the other bit that you went to? The original question was around the
implied temperature.
Oh, yes, implied temperature rise. Yes, so that's absolutely required for with the plan. So our implied temperature rise score looks at the decarbonisation plans of the companies within a portfolio, for example, and it looks at the company's previous trajectory of emissions. Looks at, well, are they already on a pathway downwards, and what are they committed to do by what times? Because most companies are also reporting interim targets as well. And then it looks at some of the models that exist, and we've got the ability within the system to apply different models depending on usually sectors as to what the kind of trajectory could look like as a sector, and then applies those things together to sort of look at, well, does it look like if you then, for want of a better word, munge together all the stuff that's in your portfolio, how are you likely to perform in terms of decarbonisation? Is your portfolio likely to get there in time or not? And then you can highlight, well, where are the companies that perhaps might give you an issue, that have got perhaps a transition risk or a stranded asset risk?
Thank you. Andreas, as an investor, would you trade return against ESG? Or would you yeah, that's
the question.
I mean, theoretically, if you have less options, you should have less returns.
That is sort of the mathematical truth. We're always optimizing. We're optimizing a risk versus return, or rather return versus risk. It's a mathematical optimization exercise, and if you put an additional constraint on it, you lose out. So that's a mathematical truth. The empirical question is, how much do you lose out? And that really, when it comes down to, first of all, having, again, good data and having a good measurement of what return and risk is. So the good news is, if you do it smartly enough, you may lose a bit, but it's so tiny, you don't really realize. So, but you have to do it smartly. So a lot of the offerings that we see in the space, besides being a bit confused about what they actually mean by sustainability, the bigger problem actually is that they're far too focused on certain themes. Meaning they invest in, say, just windmills and renewable energy. that may be a good idea from a sustainability aspect, but it's certainly not a diversified portfolio. So if you follow that approach, you're going to lose out in this return versus risk question big time. Mm-hmm. If you have a large universe, you look at the entire economy, you look at the entire market, and you start building a diversified portfolio, which, has certain sustainability requirements, because you have sort of a large portfolio, you still get a very, very good return versus risk profile. So the trick is a bit in sort of being smart about sustainability, but the real trick is being smart about how you construct a portfolio.
Have you ever canceled an investment? So this brings me to this question, because of data. So if there was a bad filing.
Well, that is what sustainability investing in some sense is all about. So this cancellation, as it is called here, this is happening or has been happening for a long time. Mm-hmm. And if you want to find out what the effect is on companies, probably the first companies that were affected by that were the tobacco firms. Mm-hmm. Take a look at what the stock market performance of tobacco firms have been for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. Anybody who thinks that sustainable investing has no impact on the real economy, take a look what happened to tobacco firms. Mm-hmm. They got hammered.
Yeah, good example. Yeah, we have 5 minutes to go. Can I have one final statement of each of you, how the industry, the ESG data should develop in the next years? So from your perspective, maybe can we start with you and back to you, and then you can add your final question. Yeah, Andreas.
So we'll have this flood of data will increase. It will be, the tsunami size will increase. It will be, given that, it will be more important to make sense of it. I think that's really the crucial thing, where we need a lot of human intelligence first, to make sense of it and to have a clear idea of what we actually mean by that. That is one, and that is happening at sort of the institutional investor level. There is a lot of discontent now by institutional investors about sustainable investing, how it's done today. Not because they don't like sustainable investing, they don't like the way it's done. So that's one sort of where it needs to sort of move towards an objective way of doing things. And data is important for that. Managing the data is important, and the amount of data that we need to do this in a proper way, there's almost no end to it. So AI is going to sort of boost that tremendously.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thank you. Rebecca, what about you?
I'm going to continue on the tsunami theme. I mean, we talked about some of the standards just now, and they just keep coming. We've got the biodiversity data set that's really just not even properly kicked in yet in terms of those being published. It's just going to keep growing, and there's more and more and more. From a consumer's perspective, it's a vast amount to consume, but from a data vendor's perspective, we're trying to hoover this all up. And of course, if I've got a little human somewhere trying to do this, it's just going to become increasingly difficult to do that. And quite frankly, the ROI on doing that is going to be even increasingly difficult to achieve, because you need people to pay for that data if you've got 130 people collecting it or so. So it's, I think, the only way to make it accessible for all, achievable in terms of the volume, it is realistically through AI.
Yeah, thank you. Thorsten.
I don't know where to start, but let me maybe say I'm really curious about how things are going to unfold. So I'm in a lot of discussions with standard setters and regulators who are really concerned about what they call information overload or disclosure overload. Mm-hmm. Not only because companies are being overloaded with requirements that they have to fulfill, but also they're worried about the consumers of the data. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they have this idea that data is consumed in a linear way, like somebody picking up an annual report and reading it front to back. And as reports are getting ever longer, who can read all this, right? That's the common mantra I keep hearing. Who can read all this? Who reads all this? And I'm saying machines read all this. Mm-hmm. Machines don't complain about amounts of data. Machines will analyze the data, but then the question becomes, if we're all going to rely on big data now and patterns and correlations and machine-processed signals, who can tell us how accurate and precise they are, what they actually mean, and what the essence is? So I think there will still be an important space for domain experts and for intelligent selection and prioritization of data. And one question that really interests me very much as an accounting professor, which you mentioned that I still am, is in the sustainability and ESG reporting space. What is the KPI? What's the core summary measure that people should care about? What's the earnings per share that we have in financial reporting? What is that for sustainability and ESG? And I don't have the answer yet. It doesn't seem to be ESG ratings because they correlate very little across firms. It could be carbon emissions. I'm not sure what it is, to be honest. It could be the triple bottom line, but then you have to quantify all these things, the externalities. Christian is nodding. That's exactly the answer. I'm not sure, but I'm curious to find out.
But at least it's hopeful, that machines will, or that there will be humans handling the machine, interpreting.
It should be a teamwork.
Yeah, teamwork. Yeah. Julius,
So last weekend was the annual meeting of Berkshire Hathaway, and Buffett always told he reads like 50 annual reports a day, and then I thought, wow, like even mid-sized companies have 300, 400 pages. But if you look at Washington Post, for example, when he invested, the report only had, I think, about 20 pages. So even from 40 years ago to now, there was a huge increase to pages, and now with more and more ESG data, there will be even more pages. So I think it's basically necessary to use technology to read all this information, and also like full circle AI helping reading the information, and also AI helping generating the information.
Yeah.
So it will be machines writing the report, and another machine will be reading the
But
report.
in finance, this is common use. I mean, machine readable use are around
Utopia
for
or
like
dystopia?
10 years. Machine readable use are given. Yeah.
We're all going to be on the beach then, right?
Yeah. And there will be an AI moderator someday. Yeah. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for attending this audience. I hope this was as interesting for you as it was for me. We've come to an end. It's 4 p.m. There's still 1 hour to go. I hope you enjoyed the day. Thanks for coming. If you liked it, please spread the word. If you didn't like it, please tell me. And then I'm the guy taking the plane. And thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you.